Welcome back to the channel. So this time we are looking at the Panzerkampfwagen 35T, which is also known as the Skoda LT35. So these vehicles are quite interesting. We'll get into that in a moment. But this kit is also available through Academy, which is the boxing I've got, but it's also been reboxed by Airfix, and you'll probably see it around in shops and more readily in the Airfix box, but it is the same kit. So this build video covers both kits. As you can see, we've got the pull-out diagrams. All looks very good. Lots of sprues, quite a lot of parts breakdown, a whole load of jerry cans, as well as Lincoln length tracks. So you will have seen there at the start, we've got a book to go along with this. This is the nuts and bolts book. I believe it's still available. It might have been updated now. This is quite an old book, this version. But these books are very good. They're not the be-all and end-all Bible on certain subjects. That would probably go to Panzer tracks. But these books are sort of aging a little bit, but they're very relevant. I do like the nuts and bolts series, and you can see we've got some colour plates there. We've got some diagrams in 1/35, so you can actually measure up. But the most important thing is these really close-up images, which show off all of the sort of things that you can't see from a distance in a old black and white picture, like some cast texture and all of that. And you can see how old this is. I mean, all those books are now out. This is only volume 11. But they're very good. If you see them around, do pick them up. There's always bags of information in them, and they're a very useful resource. So starting off with the kit, we have a multi-part hole tub. So we've got to make that up with the bottom plate and the sides. And we've got a centre section as well, which is a spacer. And just nipping off these sprue gates where there's a little bit it's a little bit heavy. You wouldn't want to kind of file that at that point, so just remove the excess with side cutters, or my nippers as I use here, and then it makes it easier to clean up. And on something like this where we're making up a multi-piece hole, we do need it to be pretty clean. So you want to make sure you don't want to obviously get a dip in where that nib is by sanding too much. It just wants to be nice and smooth. It's totally gone. Now I've got all the parts here to make up the sides, the bottom and the front and back. And my intention initially was to add a figure, but that changes. Again, we'll see why as we go forward. But this is the mount for the driver figure that you get included. 2 heads as well. We've got a early campaign, so the Polish and French sort of beret they used to wear. It's kind of a big floppy type beret, and then it went to the side cap after that for 1941. Now these vehicles, this is all quite straightforward, so I'll talk about the vehicle a little bit. As far as I'm aware, these vehicles were all captured during the annex of Czechoslovakia in 1938, or it might be 1939, and they didn't produce these vehicles. So the vehicle we did before, which was the 38T, that was last week's video, that was produced by the Germans all on through the war, and then they developed it with the chassis, with the Hetzer and numerous other things, Marder and that. But the 35T, they had what they had. That is my understanding. They were all captured in a multicolour camouflage, which is quite a garish three-tone camouflage, with even some had the black lining as well, dividing it. Quite an old-school looking camouflage. And they were used then during the invasion of Poland. They were all sprayed in the Dunkelgrau, German grey, but not all of them were. So there's a little bit of confusion. There's a in the Airfix boxing, you get a camouflaged one with some painted out grey blotches with white crosses put on them, and I didn't think that was correct. I wondered why they would do that, but it turns out it's because they weren't all overpainted quite at the right time, or they ran out of time to do it. So they just overpainted the camouflage and put a white cross on. Now, I've found a picture of that one, and that is how it looks. So in the Airfix boxing, you'll get one like that, and I think you also get one to show as used in the Czechoslovakian army. So that's quite interesting. But then these vehicles were used from the capture in the Polish campaign, going east. Then they went all the way west in the French campaign. And then they went all the way back east through the first year of Barbarossa. Now, at the end of 1941, they were actually taken off the front line. Some were used as munitions wagons, so they took the turret off and they could store stuff in them. But an awful lot were also destroyed, but then a huge amount were actually sold off as well to some of the Axis allies. So yeah, they were sold off to their allies, and it then developed. So the chassis and the running gear was actually carried on with the Hungarians, who were given the use of the factories, and they developed the Turan series, which I have actually got a kit. Now, I don't know where that fits in, some way off I think, but we may get to that one. And that has the same running gear as this. It kind of looks like if you merged this tank, the 35T, with a Panzer IV. It's the sort of thing you'd come up with. It's quite an interesting vehicle. It's got very nice camouflage and lots of mesh side skirts and added armour. So it is quite an interesting vehicle. They were useless and did woefully because they were going up against T-34s, but they did exist. So that's a little bit of history on the vehicle, and we'll delve into that a bit more in depth later on. So here you can see the instructions are calling out for drilling out some areas. Now, you've got to pay attention to this because I got this wrong. And we'll come back to that later. But what that was asking for on the side of the hull is for mounting a spare wheel, which I've chosen not to do. I mount it on the mudguard, but you can mount it on the inside. So just using here, I saw some marks on the side of the hull and wanted to check that on the reference. And sure enough, there they are. And that is really good from Academy to put that level of detail in. All of these marks, these sort of stress marks from working the metal, they're all in the moulding on the kit. So I think that's some good detail, that. They probably use the same book or the same vehicle. Now this rear plate, you've got to get the fit correct, because then we get this other section that snaps it in. So I would not glue it until this point, until you're ready, and then work out where you want it to go, where it needs to fit. And I'm showing you here where it's actually meant to mount. And again, the references were vital here for working out this. So I've just got that clamped at the front and the back. And we're just trying to make sure the sides are parallel now and vertical, which is it's easy to get them to bow in. So that means we're getting a very good connection there. And you just want to hold that up until the glue sets, and then we'll put that other section in that slides in on the top. And now just test fitting the upper hull. The superstructure, sorry. And it does fit pretty good. What we haven't got a lot of locating pins here or anything. We've got beveled joins, but they work okay. They do work okay. It's often a slight worry when that's the case. But Academy have got quite good fixing points with this, so it's not an issue. So we're looking pretty good there. Now we're on to the running gear, and this is quite... it's in depth. It's not tricky. It's complex. It's not complicated. There's a few things to do first. So there's a seam line running around that, and we've also got this box that goes on the top of... We've basically got a guide wheel at the front. So you've got the running gear, and then you've got a guide wheel, and then you've got the front and back sprocket. So it's quite different to the generic tank that has a sprocket, running gear, return rollers, and an idler. This has a sprocket at the front and back, although one's a drive sprocket, one's just doing the work of an idler. And then we've got this guide wheel, so that's what this part is. It's a little bit tricky to get this set up, but it does go. As soon as the glue starts to go off, then you can pressure it. But the trouble is, if you try and pressure that, it just caves in on itself, so you've got to just let the glue set. Once that's together, you can then put the box on top. I forget what it is. It did say in the reference. This box here, it's padlocked and it's for something. I'll grab the book. So this box actually held the track gauges, which were put onto the track to improve grip in difficult conditions. And this box was closed with a padlock. So there we go. That is why these books are vital. And that just fits on here now. You've got a kind of raised section where it fits. And I have got quite a bit of glue in the back there and pushed it down. As you can see, a little bit of glue's come out the side, so we can just melt that away with a bit of extra fin. You'll find I'm trying to be a little bit cleaner with this build. We're trying to take this through the process, be completely clean all the way through, and try and finish it a bit more, slightly higher level than what we've been doing in the past. Try and bring it on a little bit. Now, luckily, with all of this running gear, the way the wheels are designed, you can actually push them on and pull them out, and then you have to glue them in place, and that makes painting easier because we need to get the rubber on these wheels. So we use the wheel mask again, make everything easy, use the tools that make life easier. So that's all set up, looks pretty good. And then we move on with the rest of the running gear. So we've got these sections going on where we're going to put the two sprockets, and then we've got all of the wheels and the bogies, I guess, for want of a better word. It's you've got sectioned parts of the running gear. There's two sections each side. So that's just a lot of cleanup and getting it together. It's trusty sanding sticks make that all life all better. So we've got the leaf springs there, and then we get this center section, a bit like a rolling pin, goes in there, which holds it all together. You get those pins sticking outside, and these leaf springs are pretty good. This is pretty much what it looks like in the reference. Then we got this main section, which has these two side parts, and that makes up the one section of running gear that has then 8 wheels, and then you get 2 of those per side, so you've got 16 wheels per side, 32 altogether, plus the 2 guide wheels. So it's quite a lot of wheels to get together, and quite a lot of clean up and plenty to do, but none of it's difficult, none of it's an issue. And like I said, it's not really complicated, it's just complex. You know, there's a lot to do, but it's all rather straightforward. And that makes up one of the sections. I do actually glue the leaf spring ends down as well, and with a little bit of super glue, just to make that bite, because the glue wouldn't be enough to hold it. It needs a bit of force just to bring that down, because what we're trying to do is the wheels, all the weight would be pushing on those springs, so you've got those springs floating in the air, it won't look right. So they need to be touching where the weight of the wheels will be pushing up against them. That's the principle behind it. Now, attaching them to the side, again, because of the way they join, you cannot push them on nicely. You know, if you put too much force, they come out of alignment. So what I do here is using a clamp just to pull it in, because that can get down enough and pull it into the right section. But we do get a gap where I've just put the glue there. There is a gap. You can't really get around it, so we have to just fill that. So in anticipation of that, I'm putting a bit of super glue in there as well, again as a holding operation. And then trusty clamp, as you can see, is not a great area for it to grab hold of, so we have to just get it in the right area, and then it will hold, as you can see with the other 3. And there we are. And then force that in as well, just in case that super glue started to dry up. and that'll get the good bond from the plastic glue. Now it is pretty good how these line up, and they are more or less level, and you can actually bend the arms out a little bit just to make them level, as opposed to moving the whole section. And there you can see that's what we got. These are gangly parts hanging off the side for the running gear. Now this is what I was saying before, that carried over into the Turan, so it's the same running gear here. I'm not so sure it's the same lower hull, but it's definitely the same running gear. And if you're interested, the Turan kit is available from Bronco, because Bronco also do a 35T series, so that's why they've got the running gear. They've already done the moulding for it, so they built the Turan 1 up on it. I think it's the Turan 1 and the Turan 2, but I'm not up on my Hungarian armour. So here we're just gluing these wheels together, and this is obviously one of the sprockets. I don't think this is the drive sprocket. One's smaller, one's larger. I think the drive sprocket's a little bit bigger. This is the idler. Whether it would be called an idler sprocket, I'm not so sure. And we've got these weird kind of dishes that go on the outside of them. Yeah, the idler sprocket is on the right there, and the drive sprocket's on the left. And that's all the wheels and the idler return rollers, and that's everything ready to go, all glued together and sanded back. Basically the sanding was to get rid of the seam line, so put all them to one side, and then we just build up the rest of the model. So the layout for the vehicle changed. So in France, so actually what I've just done is correct. The French vehicle did have the jerry can rack on the side where I drilled those holes. But what I've also done is drilled the holes on the rear of the hull, superstructure, on the engine deck. And they did not have that jerry can rack in that French campaign. That was an addition done for Operation Barbarossa. Now you could actually do both. So I didn't need to drill out that rear rack, because you could have had, for Operation Barbarossa, you could have had either the extra rack that's on the back, and I know I'm talking about something you can't see, but you'll see it later. This is where I've drilled the holes, or that rack on the side. So something just to bear in mind, I couldn't find any reference showing that rear rack for a French campaign vehicle, and it makes it a little bit more difficult, because when you get into the Barbarossa vehicles, they did have a lot of stowage, and that was something I wasn't looking to add. But spoiler alert, we do add that. So now just looking at the running gear, where I'm going to sand back that seam a little bit, and to cover that roughness, and also looking at the reference, there's actually some cast texture all over this running gear. So I thought we would add that using the same technique that we've used previously. Just stippling on Mr. Surfacer 1200 with a small brush, so don't use a large brush. And these raised sections are actually bolted on, so we want to get around those, we don't want it on those. And you can just melt this away with Tamiya Extra Thin if it goes into an area you don't want it. And it's the simple process of just getting this Mr. Surfacer on, and as it starts to slightly set and go off, that's when you dab it with the brush, and that gives a cast texture. If you want to liven it up again, you just go over with a bit of Tamiya Extra Thin, and then you can stipple it back again. All very simple and easy. And that goes for all of the area, and also the sprockets as well. So I've done these with cast texture, but not the centre. That's a plate that's bolted in there, but not on this one. So this is the rear sprocket, or the idler sprocket, and this goes in and around the bolts and in and around the centre section, but not around that raised plate that's bolted in. So once that's done, it's time to look at the side fenders. So we've got these spacers or mounting plates that take the side fender, and they hold it on to the side of the hull. So that's quite good. And they go on all right. They do sort of hang down at, they're kind of straight, but they've got this centre section which is at an angle, which can throw the eye off a little bit, but they should be sitting level. I'm just checking that the link and length track will be able to go on and there'll be plenty of space, which there is. So we can go ahead and get these side fenders on. I don't know if I actually glue these on at this point, but we do glue them on eventually. But I tend to leave most things off until I need to glue them on. And then just checking the fit there as well. It goes under the superstructure. Again, like I'm just explaining there visually, that I want to work out how to get the side fenders on. I think I can't remember what I do here. I think I get the side fenders on because the lesser of two evils is to get the side fenders to sit correctly. I have to bend them in and around the back of the sprocket, so it's actually better to get them on first and worry about the running gear afterwards, since it will fit. As you can see, I don't know how I'm going to glue that down when it's all painted without it being, and get a clean finish. So yeah, we glue them on. This is the trouble of being doing this a little bit ahead of the build, after the build, sorry. And there's the rear plate with the holes drilled in, and that is where the problem is. That's what turns this into a Barbarossa vehicle. There's a couple holes there drilled on that back plate. Now, something I didn't think was very good in the kit, I tried to drill out and it didn't work at all for me, is I think it is a gun sight for the driver's machine gun. Don't quote me on that. It might be something else for him to level up, but I just made a circle out of copper wire, and that's where it sits, you see. So I'm not so sure. It might be something for the driver to line up. Doesn't really mention it in the reference at all, but it is there always. And then we're gluing on the rear hooks as well. And you might see, for Battle of France, I've got those. It's the offset rectangle. Do let me know in the comments what that shape's called. Should have paid attention at school. They are painted black, and then they have the numbers chalked onto them or painted onto them. They were used in Poland and France, but they weren't used in Russia. So they actually have to come off and then have to sand it back. But I haven't realised that yet. And we're all going swimmingly here at this point. Just trying to get that hook in. It was quite obscure as to where it went, because you've got this side plate there, but that's actually welded to the side of the hook. So that's how they sit. They just welded it on. We've got those tools there on the side as well. Again, they're not quite right. I do find when we get into the reference that those tools aren't correct. That horn there does actually bend down. So that's correct, and I've drilled that out. Although they'd have you glue it in line. We've got the 1937 jerry cans, which is correct as well. I've got the no-tech light on, and that's where I'm going to put the spare wheel. Now there is a little bit of texture all over this model, which is fine in most places because it did have a cast texture, but it wouldn't have been on the fender, and you can see some of the texture is there. We've got a small jerry can rack here just on the rear, and on top of that the jack block goes, and I put that at a jaunty angle because it adds a bit of interest, and I did see that in the reference. Doesn't have to be screwed on straight. So this is the first jerry can rack, and we're just testing this. Now we're going to build a few Academy kits as we go forward, and then we're not going to build any more after that for a number of reasons. I don't rate them at all. They look good and they're nearly good, but for what you're going to see here, and that jerry can rack is what reminded me, is when you put the turret on and turn it, it hits the jerry can rack, which it wouldn't have. So something's wrong somewhere, and this carries on through all of the Academy kits, and then you get something like this, which just does not fit. That plate is meant to go in there, be glued down. Now I looked at some build reviews, no one mentioned this at all, but no matter what you do, you cannot get that to fit. It just won't fit. So to get around that, we go to the old trusty spares box, and we get some plasticard out, and we're just going to put a plate of plasticard in there, and that makes life a lot easier. So I'm gluing in the lower piece of the turret at the back, so we've got that set up and sorted. So that's in how we want it. And as we go forward, there's a gap there, as you can see. So I'm going to, now that's all glued up, I think I clamped that in to bring it together like that. But I've put the front mantlet on to space that front section. Otherwise that would have caved in a bit. So we do glue all of this up. Now, you could argue, what's the problem? Well, you're not going to see it from the underside, but you get a lip on the front section, and you do see underneath the turret there. So with careful application of the clamp, we can get that to where we want it to be, and then glue it in. And then when that's all glued in, we take the mantlet off, obviously, and now I'm trying to force this piece in, and there's just no way it's going to fit. There's absolutely no way. I thought this might be the way to go about it. It just will not fit. And if you do get it in, it's too far forward. As you can see, it doesn't work at all, and it throws off the mantlet. And it's meant to snap underneath there, and it's just not right at all. And when you look at the reference, it doesn't look anything like this. I don't know what's going on here. We got some really good close-ups of this part of the turret, and it doesn't look like this. So I've just put a plate of plasticard in there, glued it all together, and that looks more like it. There is a welded plate underneath the rivets, and it's just like that. So that will suffice for the moment. It's sort of right. It's a little bit too thick if you're in the game of measuring things, but it's good enough. It's a lot better than the kit part anyway. So there you can see. That sorts that. But that then does bring the turret soundly together, and then we just add all of the parts on. Something you can do, which I didn't, is when you get to the cupola, you could actually glue the door open a bit, because it was left open a bit when in battle. Unfortunately, I was going to open it and have the figures, but the ejector pin marks are so bad on the inside of that lid door that I decided just to glue it down. But like I said, if you put a little cocktail stick in there, glued it at the back and just left it open a little bit, that was quite a common thing. It's a nice touch. And there we go, that's the gun barrel in. All okay really. You want to make sure the alignment is done right, because it can throw you off a little bit. Then we got the tow cable. So I'm doing this for the Battle of France version. There's two. The tow cable was stowed in different places, so you need to cut different lengths depending on which one you're doing. Needless to say, this isn't quite right, but I make it fit. And for that, I just use super glue to glue in the cotton or the thread into the recessed part. I usually dip the thread into the super glue, but for this instance, where we've got a recess, you can actually just fill that recess up with super glue and then stick the thread into that. Either way, it's the same sort of thing. There I am dipping it into the super glue. Get a good dollop on there, and then you need to hold everything and then just push it in. As it starts to set, you need something flat like the tweezers and just force it into the recess to try and blend it down. Otherwise you get it sitting up like that, which is unnatural. And if that does happen, you can pull the thread, hold the join and pull the thread up, and it will then look like it's joined into the actual shaft of that tow hook, towing eye, sorry. And you can sand the ridge down, and you can sand the cotton thread covered in super glue as well. This is me pointing out that I've drilled the wrong holes. So this here changes the build completely. And like I said, we do need to now move this into a Barbarossa vehicle, which is actually works out for the best, but it adds a bit more work. It's made this video longer. But in the end, I was probably glad of it, if I'm honest. So first off, I need to sort out these tools, which have a different layout going into Barbarossa. So I've cut them off, and I've noticed that what they actually do is sit, they cross over at the bottom. They sit down at an angle like that. So I've put a new handle in, just using a cut-off drawing pin, pin, like a dressmaker's pin, and cut the blade at an angle so it looks like it's going into the holder, and they sort of sit like that, only a little bit further up. Now that is a problem, what I just pointed out, where I've made a sort of dent where I glued it in, and I've tried to smooth it out. So we're going to cover that with some stowage, but that is what was used in these Barbarossa vehicles. So what we just had there was a large roll of sticky aluminium foil. Now I took ages to find this, but I got it about 10 or 15 years ago, because it was a Tamiya Model Magazine article where someone was building the landing craft from Italeri, and they coated the lower hull with this to put some ribbing effect in, and it's very useful stuff, and I've had it since then. I don't know where I got it from, and I don't know what it's called, but I think it's used for fixing pipe, like air conditioning pipe. But it's very useful stuff because it's sticky and it's very rigid sort of foil, but it's malleable, but it holds its shape. It's very easy to bend into all kinds of shapes. However, it's shiny and it's a metal finish, so it does chip quite easily. So that's the downside of it. When you paint it, you can't really handle it. So I'm just making up some like canvas rolls and all sorts of things using this, just different shapes, and making them fit in different areas. In this scenario, to cover up a mistake, but in other areas, it's kind of following what I'm seeing in the reference. I'm getting the turret on, ironically, to check that it turns, which it does, but it doesn't when you put the last jerry can in that rack there. So now just adding these tools. As I say, they kind of go down at an angle. So I'm gluing on this pickaxe first at the right angle. This is going to be covered by the stowage, but if you wanted to do this and you're doing a French one, I said earlier, this is how they didn't change this. This is how they sat. They sat crossed like this, down. So if you wanted to have a go at this, then you could do this for any version. And all you'd want to do is where the join is, just wrap a thin piece of Tamiya tape, something like that, as a kind of strapping. You can see it's awkward, but it's because there's no way to hold it. As soon as it's glued down, it's fine. Once you've got the spade in there and it's crossed over, all is well. And that's kind of how they sat, like that, which is a bit odd, but that was the way they did it. Abba super glue joins the metal there to the plastic. Now, something else that was on every vehicle I've seen any picture of is this kind of rubber, I don't know what it'd be, mud guard, I guess, for want of a better word. It's a kind of protector for the front of the fender, and they just don't add them. And this is the best I could do. I was trying to cut it out of copper sheet, but it's quite a complex shape, as you can see, and it didn't work. So the best way I could do it was to stick some of this foil on and then cut that to shape. Now you don't need to add this, but because I'd gone this far, I thought I would add it. And that's kind of the shape. It just sits around the front of the fender. And I thought I would actually change out these sort of wooden strips that hold the stowage in, the jerry cans. What these are metal rods sticking up vertically, and then it's a piece of wood with a hole drilled in it that gets bolted in and then bolted down across the top of the jerry cans. So it does bend a little bit. So that's what I'm trying to do here, and that's what we can show. So I'm cutting off the bolts and the sort of shaft as well, and then we glue the uprights into the hole so that they're where we want them. And I've drilled the holes, same size hole, into the plasticard, and then we can put that on and glue it down over the jerry cans. Just test fitting it now, getting it done by eye. As you can see, they go down all right. So what I can do here while the glue's not quite set is I can line up the vertical rods using the plasticard, make sure they're in line with where I want them, and I can just glue them in over the jerry cans. We paint them all separately, so this is done at the end. This is all painted separately, but I'm just checking that the jerry can goes in there. There's a wooden stop at the bottom as well. We've got the whole line in there. They sort of help by holding each other together. I've got a couple there where you see the couple pins on them. That's actually the ones to go on the side fender, but I hadn't made up the extra jerry cans yet, that's all. And that's what you want, that sort of bend. That's what I saw in all of the reference, because it's stressed. The wood is sort of forced down over the jerry can. And there we go, with the bolts glued on the top, and that can stay there, and we just push the jerry cans into it like that. They're tighter at the ends and not so in the middle, but they all fit, it's fine. So this is how the jerry cans actually make up. It's quite simple. Just sand across there, which is where the handles are going to go, and that's pretty good. There, I mean, if you're going to split hairs over it, there should be a metal ridge in between, which sometimes etch metal, you know, you get a little etched metal piece that fits in between, but it's not an issue. I don't tend to worry as long as they look pretty good. That's good enough for me. So again, just keep messing about with the stowage and doing stuff that I'm sort of picked a couple pictures that I'm using as my reference, but they're not actually the vehicle number I'm going to use. And they've just got sort of canvas, large bits of canvas like this, which are probably bed rolls or whatever, stuff to lie on, I guess. Was just sort of draped over places like this. And to fill it out, I've just put like a rolled up piece in there as well. I did have that bit that I was going to put along the bottom there, but I chose against that in the end and put it up along the side, because it looked like the muffler or the exhaust would have got in the way of it. And lastly, I thought as we've gone this far, we will add this makeshift rack again, which was put on a lot of Barbarossa vehicles. Just again a piece of wood with some metal brackets welded onto the side fender. So for that, I've just got a old bit of copper sheet here, but you could use anything, any thin metal. Probably cut down a Coke can or something like that. And I'm just gluing those on, bent to shape, to the side of the fender back. And that's how it sits there. And again, we've got a blemish which I couldn't quite sand out very nicely, so I'm just going to stuff a bit of stowage in there, which is that long sheet. Now to pack this bedroll out, as I've done, I've put a rolled up bit of paper in there and then rolled the foil around it to get that look. So that really brings this part to the end. So although it doesn't look like construction's finished, it is. We are now ready for paint. We've got all the sub-assemblies. Here you can see I've sprayed up the wheels for the rubber black, a couple of the areas in the black where I wanted to check any seams. So that's what we've used. So we'll carry on with painting in the next video. As always, thanks for staying tuned and thanks for following along. If you want to support the channel, you can. There's numerous ways you can do that with following the links below. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, give the video a like, let me know your comments down below. This is all being added to a playlist, so this is the beginner's guide to armour modelling, and that's what the playlist is, so do follow along. I'll see you next week for part 2 of this build.